The crack of gunfire echoing through the night jerked Dahlia Jensen awake from a restless sleep, her heart hammering against her ribs as orange flames already licked at her bedroom curtains. It was 1878 in Moab, Utah, a town that had blossomed alongside the Colorado River, and Dahlia had never imagined she would become the target of the notorious Blackwell Gang that had been terrorizing the territory for months. No. She screamed, lunging from her bed and grabbing only her father's pocket watch from the nightstand before smoke choked her lungs. The summer night air felt surprisingly cold against her skin as she fled in her nightgown through the back door, bare feet cutting on sharp rocks while bullets splintered the wooden frame above her head. Burn it all down. Leave nothing standing. A gruff voice commanded from the darkness as Dahlia dove behind the small shed that housed her gardening tools. Tears streamed down her dirt-smudged face as she watched flames consume the modest homestead she had painstakingly maintained since her parents' passing 2 years prior. At 23, Dahlia had grown accustomed to handling difficulties alone. After her father died of pneumonia followed closely by her mother's broken heart, she'd managed their small farm single-handedly, selling vegetables and eggs at the Moab market twice weekly. Now, as she hid trembling in the darkness, everything she'd worked for disappeared in a roaring inferno. "She got away, boss," another voice called out, closer than Dahlia expected. "Want us to hunt her down? Leave her. She'll die out here anyway without supplies. Let's ride before the sheriff shows up." The thundering of hooves gradually faded into the distance, leaving only the crackle of flames and Dahlia's quiet sobbing. She remained frozen behind the shed until dawn painted the sky pink and gold, illuminating the smoldering ruins of her life. With shaking legs, Dahlia finally emerged from hiding. The 2-room cabin was nothing but charred timber and ash. Her small barn had collapsed entirely, and the chickens that had been her livelihood were scattered or dead. Everything, her parents' Bible, her mother's wedding dress, the small collection of books that had kept her company through lonely evenings, was gone. "Miss Jensen." A deep voice called from behind her. Dahlia whirled around, grabbing a pitchfork that had miraculously survived the blaze. Her hair, the color of honey, hung in tangles around her face as she raised her makeshift weapon. The man on horseback raised his hands in surrender. "I mean no harm. I saw the smoke from my property." Dahlia recognized him immediately. Ruben Emmett was known throughout Moab for his skilled horsemanship and the quality cattle he raised on his spread 5 miles northwest of town. They had exchanged pleasantries at the general store and occasional nods at Sunday service, but little more. At perhaps 30 years of age, he had a reputation as a decent man who kept to himself, his broad shoulders and weather-worn face suggesting years of hard work. "The Blackwell Gang," she managed, lowering the pitchfork. "They came in the night." Ruben dismounted, his movements fluid despite his tall frame. His eyes, the color of a stormy sky, surveyed the destruction before returning to Dahlia's face with unmistakable concern. He shrugged off his leather coat and wrapped it around her shoulders, the warmth and weight of it making her realize she was still in nothing but a soot-stained nightgown. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice gentler than she'd expected from a man of his stature. "Not badly," she answered, though her feet were cut and her lungs still burned from the smoke. "But everything's gone." Ruben's jaw tightened as he looked at the ruins. "The sheriff needs to know. Those men have been terrorizing ranches across 3 counties. This is the first time they've hit this close to town." "Why would they target me?" Dahlia asked, her voice breaking. "I have nothing of value." "Perhaps because you're on your own," Ruben suggested carefully. He hesitated before adding, "Miss Jensen, I have a cabin on my property." It was my father's before he passed. It's sitting empty and you're welcome to it until you can rebuild." Dahlia stiffened with pride. "I cannot accept charity, Mr. Emmett. It's not charity. The place needs looking after, and I could use help with the cooking and keeping accounts." His eyes met hers directly. "I won't lie to you, it's a modest offer, but it comes with honest work and fair pay." Dahlia glanced back at the smoking ruins of her home. She had no family within 500 miles, barely $10 saved in town, and nowhere to go. Still, accepting help from a man she barely knew went against everything her father had taught her about self-reliance. "Just until I can rebuild," she finally agreed, wrapping his coat tighter around her shoulders. Ruben nodded, relief crossing his features. "Let me take you to town first. We'll report this to Sheriff Wilson, and you can get some proper clothes at the Mercantile." "On credit?" Dahlia asked with a hollow laugh. "Mr. Donovan barely extends credit to established customers." Ruben's expression softened. "Miss Jensen, I don't mean to offend, but please allow me to advance you some of your wages. Consider it a business arrangement if it makes you more comfortable." Pride warred with necessity in Dahlia's chest, but practicality won out. She nodded once, sharply, then turned to survey the ashes once more. "May I have a moment? There might be something salvageable." "Of course," Ruben replied, stepping back to give her privacy. Dahlia walked carefully through the ruins, using a stick to poke through still warm debris. In what remained of the kitchen, she found her mother's cast iron skillet, blackened but intact. Near where her bed had stood, she recovered a scorched tin box containing a few family photographs, their edges curled and browned. These treasures she clutched to her chest like the priceless relics they were. "I'm ready," she announced, her voice steadier than she felt. Ruben helped her onto his horse before swinging up behind her, maintaining a respectful distance despite the intimacy of their arrangement. As they rode toward town, Dahlia felt the warmth of his chest against her back and fought the strange feeling of safety it provided. She couldn't afford to rely on anyone, not when she just lost everything by believing herself secure. Sheriff Wilson was sympathetic, but unhelpful. "The territorial governor's been promising additional deputies for months," he explained, running a hand through his graying hair. "But until they arrive, I can't chase armed outlaws across open country by myself." "They burned a woman's home to the ground," Ruben argued, his voice tight with controlled anger. "What if she hadn't escaped?" The sheriff's weathered face showed genuine regret. "I'll send telegrams to neighboring towns and add it to the reports I've been sending to the governor." "That's all I can do for now." Dahlia remained silent throughout the exchange, acutely aware of her appearance in Ruben's oversized coat over her nightgown. When they left the sheriff's office, she kept her eyes downcast as they crossed the main street toward Donovan's Mercantile. "Don't worry about what folks might say," Ruben told her quietly. "This town knows you're a woman of good character." His words provided little comfort as they entered the store. Mrs. Donovan, a plump woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue, noticed them immediately. "Mercy, child," she exclaimed, hurrying over. "We heard about the fire. Are you all right?" News traveled quickly in Moab. "I'm unharmed," Dahlia replied stiffly, "but I find myself in need of some necessities." Understanding dawned in the older woman's eyes. "Of course, come with me," while Mrs. Donovan helped Dahlia select several simple dresses, undergarments, and basic toiletries. She couldn't help but notice Ruben speaking quietly with Mr. Donovan at the counter, occasionally glancing in her direction. "He's a good man, that Ruben Emmett," Mrs. Donovan remarked, following Dahlia's gaze. "Keeps to himself since his wife died 5 years back, but honest as the day is long." Dahlia hadn't known he'd been married. "I'm just staying in his father's old cabin until I can rebuild," she explained hastily. "It's a business arrangement, Mrs." Donovan's knowing smile made Dahlia's cheeks burn. "Of course it is, dear. Now, let's find you some sturdy boots. Can't have you working a ranch in those flimsy town shoes you usually wear." By the time they left the mercantile, Dahlia was properly clothed in a simple blue calico dress with her hair neatly braided. Ruben had purchased supplies as well: flour, coffee, sugar, and other staples which were loaded into saddlebags. "I took the liberty of ordering lumber for your rebuilding," he informed her as they mounted his horse again. "It won't arrive for a few weeks, with the railway only reaching Green River, but it's a start." Dahlia opened her mouth to protest, then closed it. "Thank you," she said instead. "I will repay every penny." "I know you will," he replied simply. The ride to Ruben's ranch took nearly 2 hours, giving Dahlia time to observe the landscape with new eyes. The red rock formations of Moab gave way to scrubby juniper forests and open grazing land, with the La Salle Mountains rising majestically in the distance. His property, when they reached it, was impressive without being ostentatious: a well-maintained main house, a large barn, corrals, and several outbuildings spread across a gentle slope. "The Circle E isn't the biggest spread in the territory," Ruben commented as they approached, "but it's good land with reliable water." "It's beautiful," Dahlia admitted, admiring the way the afternoon sun gilded the weathered wood of the structures. They rode past the main house toward a smaller cabin set among a stand of cottonwood trees about a quarter-mile away. It was a solid structure with a small covered porch, not unlike the home she'd lost, though somewhat larger. "My father built this when he first claimed the land," Ruben explained as he helped her dismount. "Lived here while he built the main house, then kept it as a place to retreat when my mother's social gatherings became too much for him." A smile tugged at Dahlia's lips despite her exhaustion. "Was your father not a sociable man?" "About as sociable as a rattlesnake with a toothache," Ruben replied with unexpected humor. "My mother, God rest her soul, never met a stranger she couldn't turn into a dinner guest." He unlocked the door and stepped aside to let Dahlia enter first. The cabin's interior was simple but comfortable: a main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, and 2 doors that presumably led to bedrooms. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust, but the furniture was sturdy and well crafted. "It hasn't been used in a while," Ruben apologized, setting her packages on the wooden table. "I'll bring water from the well so you can clean up. The pump in the kitchen works, but the water's not been run through it lately." Dahlia turned slowly, taking in what would be her temporary home. After the events of the past 18 hours, the solid walls and roof overhead seemed like unimaginable luxury. "It's more than adequate," she assured him. "Thank you." Ruben nodded, suddenly awkward. "I'll bring those supplies and some firewood. There are linens in the chest in the bedroom, though they'll need airing out." Once alone, Dahlia allowed herself a moment of weakness, sinking onto a chair and burying her face in her hands. Tears she had refused to shed in front of the sheriff, or the Donovans, or Ruben finally escaped, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs for all she had lost. She permitted herself exactly 5 minutes of grief before wiping her eyes and standing. Self-pity would rebuild nothing. Taking a deep breath, she began to explore her new temporary home more thoroughly, making mental lists of what needed cleaning and what could wait. By the time Ruben returned with water, firewood, and the remaining supplies, Dahlia had removed the dusty coverings from the furniture and opened windows to air out the musty smell. "I've asked Miguel, my foreman, to bring over a chicken coop and half a dozen laying hens tomorrow," Ruben informed her as he built a fire in the hearth. Thought you might feel more at home with some chickens to tend." The unexpectedly thoughtful gesture caught Dahlia off guard. "That's very kind," she managed. Ruben straightened, dusting off his hands. "I should let you get settled. Breakfast at the main house is at sunrise, but I understand if you need to rest after." He trailed off, then cleared his throat. "Well, you know where to find me if you need anything." "Mr. Emmett," Dahlia called as he reached the door. He turned, eyebrows raised questioningly. "Thank you. Not everyone would have offered such help to a near stranger." Something indefinable flickered in his eyes. "We may not know each other well, Miss Jensen, but no one in these parts is truly a stranger. Sleep well." Left alone, Dahlia worked until well past sunset, cleaning and organizing the cabin until exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. The bedroom was cozy, with a surprisingly comfortable bed that she made up with linens that smelled of cedar from the chest. Despite her fatigue, sleep proved elusive as her mind replayed the terror of the previous night each time she closed her eyes. Dawn found her already awake, washing her face in the basin of cool water and pinning her honey-colored hair into a practical bun. The blue calico dress from yesterday would have to do, until she could wash the others Mrs. Donovan had helped her select. Taking a deep breath, she walked the quarter-mile to the main house, determined to earn her keep from day one. The kitchen door was unlocked, and the rich aroma of coffee greeted her as she entered. A Hispanic woman in her 50s looked up from the stove and smiled warmly. "You must be Miss Jensen. I am Rosa Fernandez." Her English carried a slight accent. "Mr. Emmett said you would be joining us. Come sit. You look as though you have not slept." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Fernandez," Dahlia replied, extending her hand. "And please call me Dahlia." "Then you must call me Rosa." She gestured to the coffee pot. "Help yourself. The men will be in shortly." Dahlia poured herself a cup, the familiar routine a strange comfort after everything that had happened. "May I help with breakfast?" Rosa smiled approvingly. "You can fry the bacon while I finish these biscuits." By the time Ruben and 3 ranch hands entered the kitchen, Dahlia had fallen into an easy rhythm with Rosa, the 2 women working together as if they'd done so for years. The men trooped in with the scent of early morning chores clinging to their clothes, stopping short at the sight of Dahlia at the stove. "Miss Jensen," Ruben greeted her, surprise evident in his voice. "You didn't need to start work so soon." "Idle hands accomplish nothing, Mr. Emmett," she replied, setting a platter of bacon on the table. "And I've always preferred to be busy." The ranch hands introduced themselves as Miguel Fernandez, Rosa's husband, and the foreman Ruben had mentioned, Thomas Parker, and Jeb Wilson. All 3 were respectful if curious, and Dahlia caught Miguel studying her with particular interest. "My wife says you lost everything in the fire," he said as they ate. "The Blackwell Gang has much to answer for." "Yes," Dahlia agreed quietly, "though I'm fortunate to have escaped with my life." "They hit the Morrison place last month," Thomas added, a lanky man perhaps a few years older than Dahlia. "Stole their horses and shot Mr. Morrison when he tried to stop them. He lived, but he'll never walk right again." "That's enough talk of violence at the breakfast table," Ruben interjected, his tone brooking no argument. "Miss Jensen doesn't need reminders." The conversation shifted to ranch business fences needing repair, cattle that had strayed into the north pasture, and preparations for the coming fall roundup. Dahlia listened attentively, learning more about the operation of the Circle E in one meal than she might have in weeks of casual observation. When the men departed for their day's work, Dahlia insisted on helping Rosa with the dishes, despite the older woman's protests. "I have been managing this kitchen for 15 years, Rosa told her with a hint of pride. "Mr. Emmett said you would be keeping the books and helping with the garden. That is enough work for one person. Nevertheless, I'll help where I can, Dahlia insisted. It's the least I can do after Mr. Emmett's kindness. Rosa's dark eyes studied her thoughtfully. He is a good man who has known sorrow. Perhaps that is why he recognized yours. Before Dahlia could question her further, Ruben returned to the kitchen, hat in hand. If you're feeling up to it, Miss Jensen, I could show you the account books this morning. The ranch's office was a small room off the main parlor, tidy but clearly the domain of a man who valued function over appearance. A sturdy desk dominated the space, covered with neat stacks of papers and ledgers. I've tried to keep things organized, Ruben explained, opening the largest ledger. But I'll be the first to admit that numbers aren't my strength. As Dahlia examined the books, she was impressed by his meticulous record-keeping, even if his accounting methods were somewhat unorthodox. You've done well, she assured him. I just see a few areas where we might improve the system. He questioned, one eyebrow raised. Dahlia flushed. I only meant during my stay, of course. Something like disappointment flickered across his face, but he nodded. Of course. I'll leave you to it then. Rosa will ring the dinner bell at noon. The morning passed quickly as Dahlia immersed herself in the ranch's financial records. The Circle E was more prosperous than she'd initially assumed, with a diverse operation that included cattle, horses, and even some timber harvesting from the wooded northern section of the property. Ruben had made sound business decisions, reinvesting profits into improvements rather than extravagances. At noon, she joined the men for a hearty meal of beans, cornbread, and cold cider. The conversation flowed more easily than at breakfast, and Dahlia found herself smiling at Jeb's exaggerated tale of a stubborn mule that had outsmarted him 3 times that morning. Miss Jensen, Miguel said as the meal concluded, I have prepared the chicken coop near your cabin. My wife included some of our best layers. Thank you, Dahlia replied warmly. That's extraordinarily kind. It is nothing, he assured her. A woman should have her own eggs to gather. It is a matter of pride. No, Dahlia nodded, unexpectedly touched by the sentiment. Indeed it is. That afternoon, Ruben showed her the extensive vegetable garden behind the main house, where Rosa grew everything from tomatoes and peppers to corn and squash. You're welcome to expand it as you see fit, he told her. Whatever you grow, we can use. The familiar work of gardening soothed Dahlia's raw nerves as she pulled weeds and examined the neat rows of plants. Here, at least, was something she understood completely: the rhythm of growth and harvest, the satisfaction of nurturing living things. She was so absorbed in her task that she didn't notice Ruben watching her from the edge of the garden until he cleared his throat. Looking up, she shielded her eyes against the late afternoon sun. You have a gift with plants, he observed. That tomato plant was half dead yesterday. Dahlia smiled, her first genuine smile since the fire. Just needed some attention and water. Most living things respond to care. Most, he agreed, his eyes holding hers for a moment longer than necessary. I'm heading into town tomorrow for supplies. Is there anything you need? Some fabric, if it wouldn't be too much trouble. I can't keep wearing the same dress. Make a list of whatever you require, he told her. And don't worry about the cost. As I said, consider it an advance on your wages. That evening, after a simple supper she prepared in her cabin from provisions Rosa had sent, Dahlia sat on the small porch and watched the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of pink and gold. The soft clucking of chickens settling in their new coop provided a comforting background noise as she contemplated her situation. In just 2 days, her entire life had been upended. Yet here she was, with a roof over her head, meaningful work, and the prospect of rebuilding. The enormity of what she'd lost still pressed against her chest when she allowed herself to dwell on it. But there was also a strange sense of possibility in this unexpected new chapter. A movement at the edge of her vision caught her attention. Ruben approached on foot, leading his horse rather than riding. He stopped a respectful distance from the porch. "I wanted to check that you have everything you need for the night," he explained. "I do, thank you." She hesitated, then added, "Would you care to sit for a moment? The evening is pleasant." Something like surprise crossed his features before he nodded, tethering his horse to the porch rail before joining her on the bench. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the dying light. "I never properly thanked you," Dahlia said finally. "For everything." Ruben shook his head. "No thanks necessary, anyone would have done the same." "We both know that's not true," she countered gently. "The world isn't as kind as you pretend." He turned to look at her then, his gray eyes serious in the fading light. "Perhaps I'm trying to balance the scales against the unkindness then. Because of what happened to your wife." The question slipped out before she could stop it, and Dahlia immediately regretted her boldness. "Forgive me, that was presumptuous." Ruben was quiet for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. "Catherine died in childbirth," he finally said, his voice low. "Along with our son. I was away on a cattle drive. Didn't even know she'd gone into labor early until I returned 3 weeks later." "I'm so sorry," Dahlia whispered, the inadequacy of the words painful in her throat. "It was 5 years ago." He looked out at the darkening landscape. "Life continues whether we wish it to or not." The simple truth of his statement resonated deeply with Dahlia. "Yes," she agreed softly. "It does." Another silence fell between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. In the growing darkness, with the first stars appearing overhead, there was a strange intimacy in their shared understanding of loss. "I should let you rest," Ruben said eventually, standing. "Tomorrow will be another long day." "Mr. Emmett," Dahlia called as he reached for his horse's reins. "Thank you for trusting me with your story." He nodded once, his expression unreadable in the twilight. "Good night, Miss Jensen." As days turned into weeks, Dahlia fell into the rhythm of life at the Circle E. Mornings were spent updating the ranch's books or helping Rosa with household tasks. Afternoons in the garden or tending to her small flock of chickens, which had begun to produce eggs regularly. She had transformed the dusty cabin into a comfortable home, adding touches of color with wildflowers gathered from nearby meadows, and herbs hung to dry from the kitchen rafters. True to his word, Ruben had ordered lumber for rebuilding her house in town, but when it finally arrived in early August, Dahlia found herself strangely reluctant to begin planning the reconstruction. She told herself it was practical harvest was approaching, and the ranch needed every hand, but in quiet moments, she admitted the truth. She had found something at the Circle E that had been missing from her solitary life in town. It wasn't just the satisfaction of meaningful work or the security of regular meals and a safe place to sleep. It was the easy camaraderie of shared meals with the ranch hands, Rosa's maternal fussing, and most unexpectedly, her growing friendship with Ruben. Their initial employer-employee formality had gradually softened into something more complicated. They still addressed each other as Mr. Emmett and Miss Jensen in front of others, but during their frequent conversations on the cabin porch in the evenings, they had begun using first names, sharing stories of their childhoods and dreams for the future. Dahlia learned that Ruben had grown up on the ranch, the only child of parents who had come west from Virginia after the Civil War. He had attended school in Denver until he was 16, then returned to the Circle E when his father's health began to fail. He'd married Catherine, the daughter of a neighboring rancher, at 23, only to lose her 2 years later. In turn, she told him about her parents' difficult journey from Illinois, her father's determination to make a life in the harsh beauty of Utah Territory, and her mother's unwavering support despite the hardships. She spoke of her love of books, how she'd treasured the small collection that had been lost in the fire, and her dream of someday seeing the ocean. "Perhaps you will," Ruben had said one evening. "California isn't so very far. It might as well be the moon for all the likelihood of my seeing it," she'd replied with a laugh. "But dreams cost nothing, I suppose." These conversations had become the highlight of Dahlia's days, and she found herself looking forward to the moment when Ruben's tall figure would appear walking toward her cabin as the sun set. Sometimes he brought coffee or Rosa's apple pie to share, other times just himself and stories from his day. On a particularly warm August evening, as they sat watching a spectacular sunset, Ruben turned to her with unusual seriousness. "Sheriff Wilson sent word today. They caught 2 members of the Blackwell Gang trying to rob the bank in Green River." Dahlia's heart stuttered. "Did they? Are they the ones who burned my house?" "Wilson doesn't know yet. They're being held for trial, but he's asked if you'd be willing to come to town tomorrow to see if you recognize them." Fear clenched in her stomach at the thought of facing the men who had destroyed her home, but determination quickly followed. "Of course I'll go." "I'll accompany you," Ruben said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a suggestion. "We'll leave after breakfast." The ride to Moab the next morning was tense, with Dahlia lost in thoughts of what awaited her. Though she had visited town several times since coming to the Circle E, this trip felt different, a confrontation with the violence that had altered her life. Sheriff Wilson met them outside his office, his weathered face grim. "Miss Jensen, Mr. Emmett, thank you for coming so quickly. The prisoners are secured in the cells. Did they resist arrest?" Ruben asked as they followed the sheriff inside. "One did, got a bullet in his shoulder for his trouble." Wilson's tone suggested he didn't find this outcome regrettable. The other surrendered when he saw his partner go down. The jail was a small addition to the sheriff's office, with 2 barred cells visible from the main room. 2 men occupied the cells, one middle-aged with a graying beard, his right arm in a crude sling, and the other barely more than a boy, perhaps 19 or 20, with lank brown hair and frightened eyes. Dahlia felt Ruben's hand at the small of her back, a steadying presence as she approached the cells. She studied both men carefully, searching her memory for any detail from that terrifying night. "The older one," she finally said, her voice steadier than she expected. "He was there. I heard his voice giving orders." The bearded man spat on the floor. "You're a liar, lady. Never seen you before in my life." "She's no liar," Sheriff Wilson countered. "And you're already facing charges for the bank job. Adding arson and attempted murder just makes the hanging that much more certain." The younger prisoner pressed himself against the far wall of his cell, as if trying to disappear. "I ain't never burned nobody's house," he protested, his voice cracking. "I only joined up with them 3 weeks ago." "Tell her, Ed, shut your mouth, boy," the older man snarled. Dahlia looked at the young prisoner, seeing the terror in his eyes. Despite everything, she felt a flicker of pity for him. "I don't recognize him," she told the sheriff. "He wasn't there that night." Sheriff Wilson nodded. "That matches what we've heard. The younger one's wanted for horse theft in Colorado, but he's not been with the Blackwell Gang long enough to have been part of the raids around here." "What about the others?" Ruben asked, his voice hard. "The rest of the gang, still at large," Wilson admitted. "But with Ed Tanner here singing to avoid the noose, we've got names and descriptions now. It's just a matter of time." Outside the sheriff's office, Dahlia drew a deep breath of fresh air, feeling strangely deflated. She had imagined that confronting her attackers would provide some sense of closure, but instead she felt hollow. "Are you all right?" Ruben asked quietly. "I thought I would feel something, relief perhaps, or vindication." She shook her head. "But seeing that man, he's just a person. A terrible person who did a terrible thing, but still just flesh and blood." Ruben's expression softened. "That's because you have a good heart, Dahlia. You were expecting a monster, not a man." She managed a small smile. "Perhaps, or perhaps I've simply moved beyond it somehow." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, an understanding that transcended words. For a breathless moment, Dahlia thought Ruben might reach for her hand, but he turned away, gesturing toward the general store. "We should get those supplies while we're here. And I believe Mrs. Donovan was holding some fabric for you." The moment, whatever it had been, was broken. Dahlia followed him across the street, wrestling with emotions she wasn't ready to name. Mrs. Donovan greeted them effusively, pulling Dahlia into a surprising embrace. "Look at you. A month at the Circle E has put color in your cheeks and meat on your bones." Dahlia returned the hug, laughing despite herself. "Rosa Fernandez is determined that no one under her care shall ever know hunger." "A good woman, Rosa," Mrs. Donovan agreed, before leaning in conspiratorially. "And how are you finding life with our handsome Mr. Emmett?" Dahlia felt heat rise to her cheeks as she glanced toward the front of the store, where Ruben was examining a new shipment of tools with Mr. Donovan. "Mr. Emmett has been a perfect gentleman and a generous employer," she replied carefully. Mrs. Donovan's knowing smile made Dahlia uncomfortable. "Of course he has, dear. Now, about that fabric you wanted, I've set aside some lovely blue cotton that would suit you beautifully. And there's a bolt of calico with tiny flowers that just arrived last week." By the time they left the mercantile, Dahlia had selected enough fabric for 3 new dresses, along with thread, buttons, and other notions. Ruben insisted on adding a package of peppermint candies and a recent edition of Harper's Magazine to their purchases. "You mentioned missing your books," he explained when she protested the extravagance. "It's not much of a library, but it's a start." The simple thoughtfulness of the gesture touched Dahlia deeply. "Thank you," she said, unable to express how much the small kindness meant. They ate lunch at the hotel dining room, a rare luxury that Ruben insisted upon before beginning the ride back to the ranch. As they left town, they passed the empty lot where Dahlia's house had stood. Only the stone chimney remained upright amid the cleared debris, a stark reminder of all she had lost. Ruben reined his horse to a stop. "We could start rebuilding next week," he said, following her gaze. "The lumber's ready, and Miguel's brother is a fine carpenter. He could supervise the work." Dahlia stared at the empty space, trying to conjure the feelings of home it had once evoked. Strange how a place that had defined her life for so long now seemed like a distant memory. "I think," she began slowly, "I think I'd like to wait until after the fall roundup. As you said, the ranch needs every hand right now." If Ruben recognized her excuse for what it was, he didn't call her on it. "As you wish," he replied simply. "The lumber won't spoil, and winter would be a poor time to build anyway." They rode in companionable silence for several miles before Dahlia gathered her courage to ask the question that had been on her mind for weeks. "Ruben, why did you really offer me a place to stay? The truth, please." He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and reflective. "When Catherine died, I was lost. I threw myself into ranch work, stayed in the saddle from dawn until dark, exhausted myself so I wouldn't have to think or feel." He glanced at her briefly before returning his gaze to the trail ahead. "The night of the fire, When I saw you standing in the ruins of your home, I recognized that same look in your eyes. The one that asks why you should bother continuing when everything that matters is gone." Dahlia's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. "And you wanted to save me from that?" "No," he replied honestly. "I don't think anyone can save another person from grief, but I thought perhaps I could offer you what I wished someone had offered me, not pity or empty words, but purpose. A reason to get up the next morning and the morning after that, until living becomes its own reward again." The simple truth of his words struck Dahlia like a physical force. Tears pricked at her eyes as she recognized the gift he had given her, not just shelter and work, but dignity in her darkest moment. "Thank you," she whispered, the words utterly inadequate for what she felt. Ruben nodded once, acknowledgement of all that remained unspoken between them. September brought the fall roundup, a frantic period of activity as cattle scattered across summer grazing lands were gathered, counted, and prepared for market. Dahlia found herself busier than ever, rising before dawn to help Rosa prepare enormous breakfasts for the ranch hands and hired drovers, then spending long days keeping track of cattle counts, expenses, and supplies. Though she rarely saw Ruben during daylight hours, he was out with the men from sunrise until well after dark. Their evening conversations continued, albeit briefer, and often with Ruben nearly falling asleep mid-sentence from exhaustion. Despite his fatigue, he still made the walk to her cabin each night, sometimes bringing fresh coffee, other times just himself and tales of the day's work. One evening in late September, as the roundup was nearing completion, Dahlia waited on her porch with unusual anticipation. Rosa had helped her put the finishing touches on a new dress that afternoon, a deep blue cotton with delicate white piping that accentuated her figure far more than her usual practical attire. When Ruben appeared through the gathering dusk, she stood nervously, suddenly self-conscious about her appearance. His steps faltered as he caught sight of her, and even in the fading light she could see his eyes widen. "You look," he began, then seemed to lose his train of thought. "That is, the new dress is very becoming." "Thank you," she replied, smoothing the fabric with hands that trembled slightly. Rosa helped with the finishing. He joined her on the porch, careful to maintain the proper distance that had characterized their friendship. "The roundup is nearly done," he said after a moment. "Another 2 days at most. That's wonderful news. You must be relieved." "I am." He hesitated, then added, "But it also means you'll likely be wanting to start rebuilding in town soon." The thought brought an unexpected pang of sadness. "Yes, I suppose so," she agreed, though without conviction. "Dahlia," Ruben said, turning to face her fully, "there's something I need to tell you." Her heart quickened at the seriousness in his tone. "What is it?" "I received a telegram from Sheriff Wilson yesterday. They've captured the rest of the Blackwell Gang, including Blackwell himself. There was a shootout near the Colorado border. Were they all apprehended?" "No." His expression darkened. "Blackwell and 2 others were killed resisting arrest. The remaining 3 are in custody." Dahlia absorbed this news, waiting for the relief or satisfaction she expected to feel. Instead, she felt only a vague sense of closure, as if a book she had already finished reading had finally been returned to its shelf. "I'm glad it's over," she said simply. "As am I." Ruben's gray eyes studied her face carefully. "You don't seem as affected as I expected." She considered this. I think the fire no longer defines me as it once did. Does that make sense?" A slow smile spread across Ruben's face, transforming his usually serious expression. "Perfect sense." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell completely, the first stars appearing overhead. Finally, Ruben cleared his throat, uncharacteristically nervous. With the roundup ending, I was thinking. He paused, then continued with more confidence. That is, I was hoping you might consider staying on at the Circle E permanently. Dahlia's breath caught. As your bookkeeper, as my wife, he said quietly, if you could consider such a thing. The world seemed to still around them as Dahlia processed his words. She had known, somewhere in her heart, that her feelings for Ruben had grown far beyond friendship or gratitude, but she had never allowed herself to hope that he might feel the same. "Ruben," she began carefully, "are you certain? I have nothing to bring to such a marriage, no dowry, no property since the fire." "I don't want property or money," he replied, his voice low and intense. "I want you, your kindness, your determination, your quiet strength. These past months, you've brought light back into my life when I thought that part of me was gone forever." He reached for her hand tentatively, and she allowed him to take it, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "I know it may seem sudden," he continued, "and if you need time to consider, I understand completely. But I wanted you to know the truth of my feelings before you made any decisions about rebuilding in town." Dahlia looked down at their joined hands, then back to his face, finding there an expression of such vulnerable hope that it nearly broke her heart. "I don't need time," she whispered. "My answer is yes." The joy that transformed Ruben's features was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Truly, truly," she confirmed, her own smile matching his. "Though I should warn you, I'm a terrible cook compared to Rosa." Ruben laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "I'm marrying you for your bookkeeping skills and chicken-raising prowess, not your cooking." Then, with exquisite gentleness, he leaned forward and kissed her. It was a brief, tender meeting of lips, but it contained a promise that made Dahlia's heart soar with unexpected joy. "I never imagined," she said when they parted, "that the worst night of my life would ultimately lead me to the best." Ruben tucked a loose strand of honey-colored hair behind her ear, his touch reverent. "Perhaps that's the nature of life, beauty, and pain so tightly interwoven that we can't have one without risking the other." News of their engagement spread quickly across the ranch, with Rosa embracing Dahlia with tears of joy and Miguel solemnly offering Ruben his congratulations with a knowing smile that suggested he'd seen this coming long before either of them had admitted it. They were married on a crisp October morning in Moab's small church, with Rosa and Miguel standing as witnesses and most of the town in attendance. Dahlia wore a dress of ivory silk that Mrs. Donovan had ordered specially from Salt Lake City, insisting it was her wedding gift and refusing all attempts at payment. Sheriff Wilson attended, announcing with evident satisfaction that the surviving members of the Blackwell Gang had been sentenced to lengthy prison terms in the territorial penitentiary. The threat that had hung over the region for so long was finally ended. After the ceremony, the couple returned to the Circle E, where Rosa had prepared a feast that would have fed twice the number of guests who gathered to celebrate. There was music and dancing in the ranch yard well into the evening, with lanterns strung from tree to tree casting a warm glow over the festivities. As night fell, Ruben led Dahlia not to the main house, but to her cabin among the cottonwoods. "I thought we would live in the main house," she said, puzzled. "We will, eventually," he replied. "But I've come to think of this place as yours, our beginning. I thought we might start our marriage here if that suits you." The thoughtfulness of the gesture brought tears to Dahlia's eyes. "It suits me very well." Inside, the cabin had been transformed. Fresh flowers filled vases on every surface, the fireplace blazed with welcome warmth, and new curtains hung at the windows. On the table sat her mother's cast iron skillet and the scorched tin box of photographs she had salvaged from the fire, carefully arranged alongside a wrapped package. "What's this?" she asked, lifting the package curiously. "Open it," Ruben urged, his expression eager. Inside was a leather-bound copy of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, the gilt lettering on the spine gleaming in the firelight. "You mentioned it was your favorite," he explained. "The one you missed most from your lost collection." "I wrote to a bookseller in Denver months ago, but it only arrived yesterday." Dahlia ran her fingers over the embossed cover, too moved to speak for a moment. "Thank you," she finally managed, "for remembering." "I remember everything you tell me," Ruben said simply, drawing her into his arms. "And I plan to spend a lifetime learning more." Later that night, as they lay entwined in the quiet darkness of the cabin, Dahlia thought about the strange path that had led her to this moment of perfect contentment. From the terror of flames consuming her home to the sanctuary of Ruben's love, it was a journey she could never have imagined on that awful night 6 months earlier. "What are you thinking about?" Ruben murmured against her hair. "How fortunate I am," she replied honestly. Despite everything, or perhaps because of it. He pulled her closer, his heart beat strong and steady against her cheek. "We both are." The years that followed brought changes to the Circle E. The main house was expanded to accommodate a growing family, first a son they named James after Dahlia's father. Then twin daughters, Sarah and Elizabeth, with their mother's honey-colored hair and their father's gray eyes. The cabin among the cottonwoods remained, maintained as a guest house, but often used by Ruben and Dahlia as a private retreat when the busy ranch life became overwhelming. On summer evenings, they would still sit on its porch, watching the sunset and remembering how their love had begun amid the ashes of tragedy. Dahlia never rebuilt her house in town. Instead, she used the lumber to construct a schoolhouse on the ranch property, where she taught not only her own children but those of the ranch hands and neighboring homesteaders. Her collection of books grew until it filled an entire wall of the main house, with Pride and Prejudice holding a place of honor. The Blackwell Gang became a distant memory, a story told to remind their children of how courage and kindness could emerge from even the darkest circumstances. What remained vivid was not the destruction of that night, but everything that had blossomed from it: a family, a home, a love that had transformed two wounded souls. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ruben surprised Dahlia with a journey to California, fulfilling her long-held dream of seeing the ocean. As they stood together on a cliff overlooking the vast Pacific, waves crashing against the rocks below, he wrapped his arms around her from behind. "Was it worth the wait?" he asked, his voice still carrying the same warmth that had first begun to heal her broken heart. Dahlia turned in his embrace, raising a hand to the face that had become dearer to her than any other. "Everything with you has been worth the wait," she told him. "Even the fire that brought us together." Ruben smiled, the lines at the corners of his eyes deepening with the expression she had come to treasure. "Then we are both truly blessed," he said, lowering his lips to hers as the setting sun painted the western sky with the same colors that had illuminated their first evening together on a small porch in Utah Territory, where healing had begun and love had taken root among the ashes of what was lost.